We could lift a significant number of Australians out of poverty. We could make childcare free, we could make university and TAFE free. So this is an amount of money that, if it was coming in every year, could make a really significant difference to a lot of Australians' lives.
One for Mum, one for Dad, and one for the country.
And there has never been a more exciting time to be an Australian.
Budgets are about choices, Fran, and you show what you value through the choices you make.
This is coal. Don't be afraid. Don't be scared. The Treasurer knows.
I want an economy that works for people, not the other way around.
We'll just end up being a third-rate economy, a banana republic.
Just follow the money.
G'day, and welcome to Follow the Money, the Australia Institute's podcast that explains economics, politics and policy in plain English. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett. The US-Israel war on Iran has dragged on into its fourth week now. This illegal conflict has already cost thousands of lives, and it's sent the global economy spiralling. But war isn't bad for everyone.
We've seen price rises of up to 55% in liquefied natural gas across Europe, and so that will ultimately flow through to global prices.
The gas cartel often tell us that there's a shortage of gas in Australia. That is simply a lie, and it's the basis that they use to make profit.
Essentially, that comes down to an over-reliance on expensive gas. Australia's been linked to the export price for gas for some time, and now we're hostage to sky-high prices.
We've so cooked our tax system that in Australia, the third biggest fossil fuel exporter in the world, when the price of oil and gas and coal go up, we feel poor. We call it an energy crisis.
Russia's illegal invasion of Ukraine sent gas prices skyrocketing a few years ago, and the gas industry made billions. Yet Australians were paying through the nose for gas. And our ridiculous tax system, which sees beer drinkers paying more tax than the gas industry pays in petroleum resource rent tax, meant that Australia was left with pretty much nothing to show for it. Well, the same thing is happening again with this conflict, but Australia can avoid making the same mistake twice. Instead of continuing to let the big gas corporations take the piss, the government could tax gas exports properly. Reports last week suggest that maybe, just maybe, the government is thinking about doing just this. And that's not the only sliver of hope in these dismal times. And joining me back on the show this week is Rod Campbell, Research Director at the Australia Institute. G'day, Rod.
Hey, Eb, 2 weeks in a row.
I know, I feel so lucky.
I thought after my foul language last week, I thought I might have been banned. But no, you asked me back.
Keep it clean, please. Keep it clean, Rod. While we're discussing such a dirty topic. But we are heading towards the federal budget, and the US-Israel war in Iran has created basically an energy crisis for the rest of the world. Iran's closed down the Strait of Hormuz, sending oil prices skyrocketing. And as I mentioned in the intro, a similar thing happened when Russia invaded Ukraine. So before we kind of get into the Australian context, how do these kinds of energy shocks end up impacting Australia's energy prices on the other side of the globe?
Yeah, I mean, the basic answer is our energy prices go up. And to state the obvious, petrol prices are going up because, as you said, the oil price has gone through the roof because so many big oil producers ship oil through the Straits of Hormuz. Sorry, my pronunciation of Hormuz may not be correct Farsi. And energy prices are linked because, for a lot of power stations, for a lot of big industrial users, they have an option of either using electricity or oil-based products. And electricity can be generated by coal or by gas or by oil. So, to some extent, energy products are interchangeable. Economists might call them substitutes. And so they all tend to move in the same direction together. So much oil comes out of the Persian Gulf. A lot of LNG comes out through the Persian Gulf. Not a lot of coal comes out. And so you're seeing coal prices haven't increased by as much as oil and gas prices. And in fact, gas prices aren't up as much as after the Russian invasion. I think that's mainly because, pipelines between Europe and Russia were physically blown up, and suddenly there was this, wow, we really can't get gas through there for a while. So, yeah, prices are going up. Oil's the most affected, then gas, but everything's still holding off a little bit But still, it's a great time to be looking at Australia's tax system and how we avoid the mistakes of last time.
Yeah. So reporting last week suggests that the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet has requested some economic modelling from Treasury about levying a tax on coal and gas exports. Why do you think the PMO have asked for that modelling, and what could it mean for the budget?
Yeah, and look, I'm no expert at these things, Eb, but it feels like the asking was leaked. And to demonstrate we're getting into budget season, it's the month where the political class and people who are addicted to newspapers like you and me spend the month wondering what might be in the budget. I think if the Prime Minister and his department really wanted to know what options are on the table for taxing the oil and gas industry, like this has been done a million times. It's already on their hard drives. Maybe they've got hard copies sitting on the shelves, or they could just walk down to Treasury and ask. So I think it's more in the spirit of budget season that the media somehow discovered that the Prime Minister has asked for some modelling on this. But yeah, plenty's been done on this for years. So I don't think intellectually anyone needs to cover any new ground. I think it's more about flying kites for the budget.
So why has the Australia Institute and other organisations like the ACTU kind of proposed this idea of a tax on gas exports? In particular, the ACTU has suggested a 25% tax on gas exports. How would that work, and how much money could a gas export levy raise?
Yeah, so what's been proposed is really simple. And when you're designing taxes, a key thing to keep in mind is the simpler it is, the easier it is to implement, and the harder it is to get out of. And so that's kind of the beauty of a straight tax on gas export revenue. If you're a gas company and you export a $10 petajoule of gas, then you're going to pay $2.50 worth of tax on that. Gas companies have exported between $60 and $70 billion a year worth of LNG, liquefied natural gas, in the last couple of years. So you're looking at about if you divide 66 or whatever it is by 4 or 25%, then you get to about 17 billion. So yeah, Australia could be raising about 17 billion, or that's what would have been raised in the last couple of years, by having a straight levy on gas export revenue.
What would that mean for Australia?
Yeah, well, needless to say, $17 billion is quite a lot of money. We often talk in big numbers and they all kind of sound the same, millions and billions and stuff, but $17 billion is really significant in the context of the Australian budget and Australians' lives. There's about 28 million people in Australia. We could send a check for $600 to every man, woman and child in Australia. You'd send a check for $700 to every adult. So New Start, unemployment benefits, they cost taxpayers about $17 billion a year. We could double New Start. We could lift a significant number of Australians out of poverty with this amount of money. We could make childcare free. We could make university and TAFE free. So this is an amount of money that, if it was coming in every year, could make a really significant difference to a lot of Australians' lives. So it's not just rounding error. It's not a bit of a nice to have, something that that boffins at the ATO can fight about. This is a really big deal for all of us.
And would that kind of a tax cost Australians anything? Does it end up showing in people's electricity bills?
Oh no, and I guess that's part of the beauty of this proposal, is that it not only raises money, but because you're only taxing the export revenue, you're actually providing an incentive for gas companies to sell to the domestic market. So you're a gas company, the world price, and remember, Australia, because we export gas and our export terminals are linked to our domestic market tends to pay the world price. Even though we have loads of Australian gas, Australians tend to pay the world price. So if the world price is about $10 a gigajoule, which is about right, I think I might have said petajoule before, but gigajoule, what's a factor of a billion between friends? Gas price is about $10 a gigajoule. you're an exporter. Shall I export it and pay this 25% tax, in which case I'll only get $7.50, or maybe I could sell it for $8 on the domestic market, or I'll sell it to the domestic market. So part of the reason why so many people are supportive of a 25% gas export levy is because not only would it raise loads of money, but it provides an incentive to direct gas production into Australia's domestic market, and it would lower Australian gas prices relative to world prices. And that, of course, flows through because we have a fair bit of gas-fired electricity generation. You'd expect that it would reduce electricity prices in Australia as well, at least on the wholesale market. How fast and how far it went through to households, is a bit of another question. But yeah, the proposal would definitely reduce Australia's wholesale gas and electricity prices and raise a bagload of money. So this is a good.
You've released some polling today. It shows support for a gas export tax from One Nation voters and from Green voters.
Yep.
Were you surprised by that?
No. I think so much of our political coverage is trapped in left, right and, Labor and Liberal fighting in the centre. But there's lots of issues where One Nation voters, Clive Palmer supporters, Greens and Teal voters, they actually agree with each other.
So we talked last week a little bit about political support for this, and we've got basically support from across the political spectrum: independents, the Greens, Pauline Hanson, Clive Palmer, the ACTU, not groups that are normally united on much. But what do we know about what Australians think about this proposition of a 25% tax on gas exports?
Yeah, so Australia Institute had polling out yesterday looking at opinions on this, and, there's huge support for it. About 60% of people agree that this is a good idea. About 10% are opposed, and the other 30% aren't quite sure. So it's interesting. It's not quite in, do you think puppies are cute territory, which, you'd have 95% of people saying, yes, puppies are cute, and 5% just don't like puppies, and nobody doesn't know how they feel about puppies. There's still 30% of people who don't know. But the key point is, 60% support. This is huge support. Yeah, it's across the political spectrum. I was looking at the detailed results. They're on our website. Men slightly more likely to agree with this than women, which is interesting. But look at the website for the detailed results. In general, very, very strong support. I think what's interesting about the strong support is, people want to see this happen. And the flip side of that is people will be very upset if they see that gas companies get away with making a mozza while they're paying through the nose for fossil fuels that companies are profiting from. So will any parties want to contest the Farrer by-election on a platform of letting the gas industry take gas for free and give nothing back? I don't think so. So while support is one thing, and that's good, I think there's potentially real political downside to not acting here. And, that's new, I reckon. In the past, where we've seen mining and gas push against efforts to tax them better, I think there isn't a lot of backlash to letting them have their way. Whereas I think this time around, enough people are upset enough at the gas industry that a government or a party saying, no, we're actually on the gas industry's side here, they could suffer some real negative consequences for that. And, I think that's interesting to watch.
Yeah, because people now actually understand that they've been getting ripped off, essentially, and that we're not getting much in return. So the gas industry obviously is not a huge fan of this proposal, neither is the business lobby. I've seen the Business Council of Australia argue that this puts future investment at risk, and the gas lobby kind of talking about now, it's the last time that we should be kind of thinking about putting a new tax on business. How do you respond to those kinds of responses from the business lobby and from the gas industry itself?
Yeah, I mean, from the gas industry, it's clearly entirely self-serving. They would say that, and, you've only got to look abroad and see countries like Norway and Qatar, which have much, much higher effective tax rates. and they get loads of investment from the gas industry. So, I wouldn't pay any attention to what the gas industry is saying. Well, I think the Business Council is a little bit more interesting because the effects of this on their members are different. And so I was reading a post on the Motley Fool stock market website today, and they were talking about how this could actually work really well for companies like AGL because they'll get gas cheaper, and that could work for them. All big manufacturing firms, your Blue Scopes and other manufacturers, this will actually work quite well for them.
This could make gas cheaper for them.
Yeah, absolutely. And other, like the big banks, they don't want to see people defaulting on home loans and so on. So, what's good for consumers and mortgagees is pretty good for the big banks. So, I'd love to be a fly on the wall in Business Council meetings. Actually, that'd probably be really tedious, actually. But I think the different positions of different big companies aren't necessarily very clear on this, and it'd be interesting to watch the Business Council's language and position. Whether do they back their gas industry members who would clearly be hurt by a tax on the gas industry, or do they back their other members that would actually benefit? So
they're not all aligned on this.
Yeah, watch that space.
The other critique, I guess, or a concern that I've seen raised by some commentators is that Australia will be seen as kind of an unstable or untrustworthy business partner if we kind of put a levy on our gas exports, after all this time, and that might be maybe a diplomatic or a trade risk for Australia. Is there any substance to that?
No, I don't think there's really anything in that at all. I mean, and anybody who's seriously looking at Australia as an investment destination would know a lot of the context here. They would know that Australia gets a very poor return for our gas. They would know that this has been increasing in public profile as an issue for 5 years or so. They're seeing the Prime Minister's office arguably leak their requests for information. So, all to help telegraph this. So everyone's seen this coming for a long time. I mean, climate change and climate policy has been a thing that Australia's saying it will respond to for a long time, and this can be seen as part of that. So, the idea that Australia needs to act on climate, Australia has problems with not raising enough revenue, what might they do about it? Oh, maybe they will address their chronically undertaxed gas exports. I don't think it's a surprise. This is not like it's not like we're nationalising the mining industry overnight or something like that, as fun as that might be.
Something to consider for down the track, perhaps.
Yeah,
right?
elbow, if you're listening. I don't think this would come as a surprise to any serious investor who's been watching Australia. So I think, again, this is the gas industry talking its own interests.
Okay. Well, the last thing I wanted to ask you about was basically some people are arguing that it makes more sense to put a windfall profits tax on the gas industry rather than a flat export tax. Could you just briefly explain the difference, Rod? And is one kind of better than the other? What should we be looking out for here so that we don't see the gas industry kind of wiggle away again through loopholes to avoid paying its fair share?
So in a nutshell, the 25% gas tax that's being proposed, it's really simple. It's really hard to get out of. You sell a $10 gigajoule of gas, you pay $2.50 in the gas tax, end of story. Whereas a windfall profits tax, so windfall, when economists say windfall, they mean an amount of profit that isn't just a fair return on investment, but some bonus profit that you got through no effort of your own. So
Vladimir profit.
Yeah, Vladimir Putin invades Ukraine, gas prices go berserk. The gas that you had been selling for $10 a gigajoule, you're suddenly selling for $30 a gigajoule.
And it's not because it's better gas or it's
not
cleaner
better gas,
or
you're not producing more of it. Your costs haven't gone up. None of that kind of thing. Your loans and conditions on borrowing money haven't changed. It was just a pure external happening that has just landed you a bag load of money. And we saw that over 4 years, Australia's gas industry has landed, in our estimate, about $116 billion in windfall profit. And economists like to tax windfall profit because it's just pure happenstance, it's pure chance, it's nothing you could have expected or worked for. Then it doesn't taxing that doesn't affect how much you might want to invest in a country or an activity, and so it's seen as very economically neutral. The problem is that it's very hard to work out, how much was windfall and how much was justified profit. So you've got to go in, you've got to be able to see the gas industry's books. You've got to, you're selling it for $10 a gigajoule. So maybe it cost $6 a gigajoule for the gas company to produce and get on a ship, and maybe a fair return might be another $1 a gigajoule. So maybe it's $7, and then what will we tax the rest of it at a different rate? And it suddenly becomes quite complicated. And it's complicated because our existing petroleum resource rent tax, it is a windfall profits tax, and it's not working. We've had a windfall profits tax in place for 40 years. It's broken, it's not working. So having an extra windfall profits tax probably is going to meet a similar fate. So, I think in the days after Russia invaded Ukraine, and Australian Institute was calling for windfall profits tax, so was Joseph Stiglitz, so was everybody else. I think what they were really saying was, what we were all really saying was, how about you tweak your existing windfall profits tax because you can...
To fix it, to make it work.
To fix it. You probably won't have to pass this through Parliament. You can do it today. But, years have gone by. We didn't do that. Boo-hoo. We should have. But now we're in a different position. We've also got this problem with domestic gas supply, and there's a better solution on the table, which has a clear path through Parliament. So a straight tax on gas export revenue is better for the current circumstances that Australia finds itself in.
And so before we move on to coal, can you just remind us of the situation that we have at the moment? How much tax does the gas export industry pay? How much are they paying for the gas they export in royalties? Just give us a lay of the land.
Yeah, so famously, our petroleum resource rent tax, that's the main tax that is meant to tax the windfall profits of the gas industry while we're exporting $60 to $70 billion a year worth of gas. That's raising between $1 and $2 billion a year in revenue. And famously, that's less than beer excise, it's less than HEX repayments. It's really not a lot of money. So on that measure, the gas industry is paying absolutely bugger all. And in company tax, years and years go by and the main gas companies that people can name pay no company tax. So Santos Limited has racked up 10 years of not paying company tax on about $47 billion worth of sales. I think the Ichthys project is something similar, possibly never, but certainly not for a long time, paid company tax. What we have seen in the last couple of years with these stupendous profits, some gas companies have paid a bit of company tax. I think the gas lobby is running around saying that if you add up PRRT and state royalties that some of them pay to the state of Queensland and every other fee they pay and their company tax, that you get to about $20 billion a year. And good, they've had a $116 billion windfall, and our company tax system has clawed a small amount of that back. So, yeah, there's lots of different numbers running around. They need to be seen in context. But I think the clear picture is that compared to other countries, Australia's not getting a big return on our gas exports. And if you look at over the longer term, Australian teachers pay more tax than the oil and gas industry in both company tax and PRRT. Nurses pay more tax than gas companies, PRRT and company tax over the longer term. So yeah, that'd be the context I'd look at it in.
So I want to turn now, Rod, to the New South Wales coal industry. It's something the Australia Institute has done quite a lot of research on over the years.
Making me feel old, Eb. If you make me list how many years it is.
Yeah, it's too much to think about sometimes. But Chris Bowen has said that no new gas and coal is a slogan, not a policy.
Why do we need new coal and gas?
Well, what we need is a sensible... Saying no new coal and gas is frankly a slogan, not a policy.
But last week we saw the New South Wales Labor state government become the first government to ban new coal mines. So I just wanted to ask you, how big of a deal is this, Rod?
Oh, it's a really big deal. There are very few places in the world that have said we're not going to have new coal mines, let alone states that are major international coal producers. The idea that the home of the world's largest coal export port at Newcastle, that state has said we're not going to have new coal mines, I think it's a really big deal. And it sends a massive message around Australia, particularly north of the border to Queensland, and around the world, saying, we're actually going to start stopping fossil fuels in New South Wales. Yeah, I think it's really good news.
So it's the beginning, essentially, of a fossil fuel phase out. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, this is to stop using fossil fuels. You have to first stop starting new projects, and saying no to new greenfields projects is the first obvious step. I've seen quite a few people disappointed that major coal mine expansions weren't ruled out, and absolutely, that is a problem. The expansions of existing mines beyond their existing approvals is actually a much bigger deal than the handful of genuinely new, what economists and coal industry people would call a greenfields mine. There's not that many greenfields mines proposed for New South Wales. There's still a handful, but none of them are owned by BHP or Rio Tinto or Gina Rinehart. They're not owned by anyone powerful or anyone that really counts. So this isn't the New South Wales government really staring down power and saying, no, we're becoming complete climate champions. Not even close. But is it a good first step? Absolutely it is.
Yeah. And I just want you to put it in a little bit more context for us because, recently you have talked about how stopping new coal mines in New South Wales has helped a country like South Korea, for example, begin its fossil fuel phase out a lot earlier. Can you just draw a link between what's happening in New South Wales and South Korea, for example, to illustrate kind of why this kind of policy is important?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is actually really exciting, and it's a really good demonstration, a solid example of why what Australia does on coal really counts, and why grassroots community activism on climate and on coal mines and things can have internationally significant results. So at last year's COP conference, the big UN climate conference, one of the big announcements was that South Korea, one of the biggest coal users in the world, was bringing forward when they're phasing out coal from 2050 to 2040. So a full decade of one of the world's biggest coal users, a full decade of their coal use has now been written off, been reduced. Yeah, this is really significant for climate action. And what were some of the factors leading to that? Well, there's lots of things behind it, and maybe we could do a full episode on it one day. But a really significant part of it was that 3 new greenfields coal mines owned by South Korean government-linked companies were all proposed for New South Wales. And all 3 of them were beaten. And they were beaten by local community activists, farmers, environmentalists, and they were backed by help from the Australia Institute, help from the Environmental Defenders Office, help from Lock the Gate. It's a really good demonstration of this Australian environmental movement, small local groups and bigger, more national groups all working together to stop particular projects. And had those projects not been stopped, South Korean government-linked companies would have spent $2 billion developing coal mines that would now be selling about 13 million tonnes a year of coal back to Korea. And could those Korean state-backed companies have committed to phasing out coal-fired power if they had just spent billions and billions of dollars developing their own coal mines and becoming vertically integrated? I think it would have been heaps harder. And there's actually a great Korean climate group in Australia at the moment, and they're in the Newcastle Herald today saying, yeah, this would have been harder if New South Wales and community activists in New South Wales hadn't stopped these Korean coal proposals. It would have been much harder for Korea to bring forward its coal phase out. So it's really exciting, and it's a big deal.
Yeah. And I think it's also a big deal because, as you say, we've been working on this for a long time. Rod, I was just reflecting that we first launched the No New Coal Mines campaign with former Kiribati president, the Pacific leader, Anote Tong, way back in 2015 ahead of the Paris climate COP. And, it seemed like a pretty big new idea at the time.
And so if we are serious about sustainable future, then we must get off coal as soon as possible. In time, we must get off other fossil fuel. One immediate and very possible, reasonable action is agreeing to a moratorium on coal. And I'm indeed very heartened by the growing support for that coal.
Now, here we are, and the very first Australian state has committed to no new coal mines. It takes a long time, but it's very exciting.
As a former Canberran, I'd like to just say, actually, I think the ACT committed to that a while ago, but they don't have nearly as much coal in the game as New South Wales did. 2015, Richard and Anote Tong, Kumi Naidu, who wrote our recent Vantage Point essay, they were all involved in starting to popularise this idea of no new coal mines. And at that time, we were saying, hey, this isn't such a radical idea. Look at all these other places that have had similar kinds of restrictions on fossil fuel supply. And we were talking about fracking bans in the Northern Territory and in Victoria. Indonesia had a bit of a moratorium on new coal mines. But none of those were because of climate. All of the examples we kept pointing to were because of concern about groundwater, concern about prices, concern about energy security. There are, I'm not sure if, I doubt this is unprecedented, but there are very few examples where a major coal-producing state, in fact, I'll go as far as to say this is the only example of a major coal-producing state putting a moratorium on new mines because of climate. The Paris Climate Agreement is mentioned in the relevant policy document. I read it this morning. And it's because of climate. There's no weaseling around, we value water supplies and scenic beauty and rah. They are saying we don't need new coal mines because we're signed up to our own net zero targets. We've got our own net zero legislation. We're signed up to Paris. Our export partners are similarly signed up to Paris. The International Energy Agency is saying coal demand is going to go down, so we do not need new coal mines because of climate. And
Yep.
I think that's really important. It's a real step forward.
So it turns out Chris Bowen was wrong and it actually is a policy. Why should other jurisdictions like Queensland follow suit, Rod?
Well, because climate scientists, the UN, the International Energy Agency have all on the record saying 1 million times, if we're going to avoid climate catastrophe, there is no need for new coal mines. There is no need for new gas projects. And a moratorium like this, it means that existing coal mines have certainty around how much competition they've got, what's going to happen with prices, what's going to happen with other investment. So it works not only for the climate, but it works for the owners and workers in existing coal mines. So I think, Queensland should absolutely be following suit. So should hopefully jurisdictions around the world.
Well, thanks so much for joining me, Rod.
Thanks for having me, Eb.
If you want to see the gas industry pay its fair share, you can join nearly 25,000 other Australians who've signed our petition calling for a 25% tax on gas exports. You can find it via the link in the show notes. And if you want to know what's going on in federal politics as it happens, check out The Point Live with Amy Ramakis, our chief political analyst. It's our Federal Politics Live blog, full of fact checks and analysis from experts here at the Australia Institute. And you can join Amy every sitting week to examine the wild and often ridiculous world of federal parliament. Find it at thepoint.com.au. This episode was recorded on Tuesday, the 24th of March 2026. Our theme music is by Jonathan McFeet from Pulse and Thrum, with additional music from Blue Dot Sessions. I'm your host, Ebony Bennett. Thanks for listening.